So here we are, days after the election that gave the controversial AfD 94 seats in the Bundestag, now reduced to 93 because one of their leading members decided to resign from the party. Meanwhile, the FDP is back with 80 seats. So far, so routine. In a previous video I said that the next thing to do is to put together a governing coalition. But apparently there is something else that needs to be decided. The seating arrangement. I didn't think that this was something that anybody needed to worry about. Where I'm from, politicians sit not in seats, but on benches. The government sits on one side of the chamber, the opposition sits on the other side. Benches at the front are traditionally reserved for members of the cabinet and the shadow cabinet, and apart from that, everybody just battles it out among themselves. But of course, the British system is archaic. No, what the modern Legislative Assembly requires is proper chairs with desks and microphones and everything. And each delegate has to have a specific seat designated for them and them only. There are already problems with a number of delegates. A few years ago, a small change was made to the procedure for allocating seats in order to deal with a small problem that might theoretically arise under certain very specific conditions. In short, it was possible for a party to receive one seat more or less than it was strictly entitled to. I don't understand all the details, and to the best of my knowledge it has never actually happened, but in theory it was possible. Of course, there are a couple of very easy fixes for this problem. The German government applied none of them and instead opted for a system that partially fixes the problem by increasing the total number of delegates. And that's why the new Bundestag has over 700 delegates, the largest number in its history. Before the change, it usually had somewhere around 650. Somebody has had to go out and buy a whole lot of new chairs. So space is already tight, but now politicians are squabbling over where they should sit. Not all politicians mind. The FDP, of whom I personally had higher expectations. Who decides the seating arrangement? Well, it turns out it's a special committee made of representatives of all the parties that meets to plan the first session of the new Bundestag. That's its function. That's all it does. And then it disbands. Previously, the FDP have usually sat in the middle, to the left of Angela Merkel's CDU-CSU, the Union. But apparently this time the plan is to have the FDP sit to the right of the Union, and that means sitting next to the AfD. And at this point, senior members of the FDP threw a foot-stamping tantrum worthy of a group of primary school children. While some committee members came out of a meeting saying they'd worked out a seating plan, the response from the FDP was, "No we haven't, no we haven't, no we haven't!" They're saying that their usual position in the centre is of great symbolic value because that's where their policies are. But we all know that what they're really saying is, "You can't make us sit next to the AfD. They're horrible and smelly and we hate them." Okay. Let's just get a grip, shall we? I agree that it is rather odd that the FDP are not getting their traditional seats. But honestly, does it really matter that much? Look, I understand that you abhor the AfD and everything they stand for. I get that. We all get that. I'm not exactly thrilled to see 94 of them in Berlin either, but that's just my own personal political viewpoint. You can't catch right-wing populism by sitting next to a right-wing populist. This is politics, not head lice. And honestly, given the stuff that we have to talk about, climate change, terrorism, the continued non-opening of Berlin's new airport, that your first act after your triumphant return to national politics is to generate headlines by whining about seating arrangements, that is disappointing. I mean, back in my home country, Parliament is looking more and more like a retirement home for substandard clowns. Please, don't turn the Bundestag into a badly run kindergarten. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to send me a postcard, here's the address. And don't forget to visit my website and follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Also, if you'd like access to special bonus content and help with the costs of running this channel, please consider making a small monthly donation on Patreon.